Now that we've discussed upload and the processing that happens right after, let's take a look at what image masking is all about and why do we need to have image masking. Now, when working with imagery data, every image that you upload will come in the format of a rectangle. Now consider this. Let's say you have satellite imagery for Singapore. And let's say further that it's not such a high resolution image, and so the imagery data for the whole city appears in one image data set. So in other words, you can imagine like a rectangle, and within it is the satellite imagery of Singapore, which is really what you want. So that's the content within the rectangle that you want, and you don't really care about the content around it. And the idea is, or the expectation rather, is that when you overlay this imagery on top of the base map tiles, as you create image layer and share it out through a map, you only want the satellite imagery for Singapore to come from the image that you had uploaded and used, whereas all the areas around it should be transparent. So in other words, there will be content that you want and content that you do not want. And so typically when we have imagery data sources, to make it easier for us to identify between these two items, content that you want and content that you do not want, is usually either black, so RGB 000, or white, 255, 255, 255. Sometimes, depending on how the image was produced and processed, they may be slightly off black or off white, and so we will get into that in just a while. So what I'm trying to say is this part of the image that is made up of black pixels or white pixels is that part of the image that you want to make transparent, so that as you overlay this image on top of the base map tiles, the data from the base map tiles will be visible at places where we have these fills. So the way for us to specify this region or this area which is made up of the fills is what we call an image mask. An image mask is nothing but a set of fixed pixels that comprises this area that we want to make transparent, so that we are able to see underlying data, in our case the data from the base map tiles. So in Maps Engine there are 4 masking options. The first is auto masking, and this is the default option. And as we upload imagery data sources, part of the processing that happens right after upload applies the masking onto the imagery data source. And so it's important that we understand the differences between each of these options, so we apply the best masking technique for the image data set that we're working with. So going back to auto masking, which is the default method which is applied as you upload and process the imagery data, it is ideal for images whose fills touch the corner of the image. Now for images which have fill regions that do not touch the corner of the image, auto masking is not the most ideal technique, and so we'll need to take a look at the other options available for us to specify the fills within the imagery. Also, for cases where the fills is not made up of completely black or completely white pixels, let's say they are slightly off-white, auto masking doesn't do such a great job. So in these cases you could either use tools. For example, GDAL has a near black tool which will help you convert an image with a near black fill region so that it appears in a completely extremely black mode, or the other option would be to provide your own masking file so that you can exactly specify which pixels are to be transparent and which pixels are to be left opaque. The second option is alpha channel masking. So for some files along with the RGB channels, you also have an alpha channel. So for each pixel where you have the values for RGB, you also have another channel which we call the alpha channel, which specifies whether that pixel is supposed to be transparent or not. So this is a good method that you could explore when working with imagery data where auto masking will not be such a good option. However, one thing to take note of is that right now We do not support partial transparency, so it's going to be either transparent or not. So 0, let's say, for transparent, and 255 for not transparent. Anything in the middle is invalid. The third option is providing your own masking file. So you would have to create your own masking file, and what this is really is just specifying which pixel, again, is to be left transparent and which pixel is not transparent. And you will provide this masking file during the upload when you're uploading the data set. So apart from all the other files that make up the data set, one of the files to be included is the masking file. One thing to take note of is the naming of this file, and it should follow this particular convention. So you should start with the same name as the data set name, followed by a hyphen and then a mask dot whatever the suffix of the masking file is. The final option is applying no mask at all. However, most of the time this will not work because, like we talked about earlier, typically imagery files will have the fill regions as completely black or white pixels, and so it will be very unattractive or ugly looking if you do not apply any mask. Just to give you an idea of what it may look like, let's say you do not apply any masking, is shown on this slide. So this is a file with some imagery data where we applied auto masking, and the same imagery data where we chose the no masking option. So what happens is, since masking wasn't specified, we were not able to distinguish between which pixels to be made transparent and which ones to be left opaque. Everything was set to be non-transparent, and so as a result, this is what you see in the processed output. So now let's go over to the Maps Engine console and see where you can choose the masking option. So after you have uploaded an imagery data source, you can get into the data details page, and if you scroll towards the bottom, you will see a section called Image Masking, and here is a drop-down list where you can choose an alternate masking option for your data source. By default, it is auto mask. However, auto mask may not be ideal for all data sources like what we've just discussed. So if you prefer to use any of the other masking options that are available, you may choose to do so by using one of the options available from this drop-down list. If you make any changes, for example, you choose a different masking option, what's going to happen is, let's say we choose no mask, it is going to ask you to reprocess the image source, and so you will need to click this button and reprocess it so that the appropriate masking technique is applied for this data source. And once the processing is done, you will see the results in the preview box, and you'll be able to use this data source and add it to a layer or a mosaic.